Q, and we're going to be going through the rest of the alphabet. Now, in podcast number 1, we spoke about letters A to G, and we also talked about the vowels. In this podcast, we are going to talk about letters H to Z in as much detail as possible within the 10 minutes. Now, just a reminder, there will be help sheets on this as well, so you can see it all written down in front of you if that is your preferred way of learning. It'll also have a few more tips on how to recognise and pronounce the letters correctly. So we'll start this off with the letter H. Now, the letter H in the Spanish language is the only letter that is silent, no matter where it is in the word. Whether it's in the beginning or the middle, it doesn't matter, it's always silent. For example, we have the word hablar, which is the verb to talk. Hablar. It has a H in the beginning, but you can't hear it. We also have the word hierba, which is the word for grass, or herb, hierba, also with a silent H in the beginning. Equally, as I've said, the H in the middle, for example, the word ahora, which means now. Ahora, that's A-H-O-R-A, ahora. So if you see a word written down in Spanish and it has a H in it, pretend like the H isn't there. The H is gone. Now, the letter I we talked about in the first podcast, so we'll just move straight on to the letter J. Now, the letter J has the same pronunciation as the letter G does when it's followed by an E or an I. If you remember, it's that throaty H sound, the H sound. Now, the J always sounds like that. It's always pronounced like a H sound. For example, the word jarra, which means pint. Jarra. Or, for example, the name Jaime. Jaime is the Spanish equivalent to the name James in English, and it's Jaime. J-A-I-M-E. Jaime. Okay. The letter K and the letter L are exactly the same in Spanish and in English both, so we don't need to go into those. However, we will go into the double L, which is the first of the 2 extra letters in the Spanish alphabet that we don't have in English. The double L is pronounced as a soft J sound, as a J. A lot of people learn, especially in school, they learn that the double L makes a Y sound. For example, if I were to introduce myself to somebody or a group of people and say my name, I would say, Me llamo Jody. Now, the way that you learn in school or in a lot of places in England with English Spanish teachers, they will teach you that it's me llamo, which in Peninsular Spain is not correct. It's a J sound, me llamo, a very soft J sound. It sounds very similar to the letter Y, which we'll get into later on. So another example of the double L sound in a word is the word Mallorca. Mallorca. In English we would say Mallorca. In Spanish, Mallorca. The letter M and the letter N both sound exactly the same in Spanish as they do in English, so we won't go into those. However, we will go into the second of the 2 extra letters in the Spanish alphabet that we don't have in English, which is the ñ, which is the N that has the little squiggle on the top. Now, the ñ is pronounced exactly the same way as the first N in the English word onion. The ñ sound, the onion, the ñ sound is exactly how the ñ is pronounced always. For example, in the word España, which is the Spanish word for Spain. España. España. It's got the N with a squiggle at the end of the word. We also have the word mañana, which means tomorrow or morning. Mañana. And that's the N with the little squiggle, the ñ. The P, once again, is pronounced just as it is in English, so we'll move on to the letter Q. Now, the letter Q you will never see by itself. It will always have the letter U afterwards, the U. And unlike in English, for example, the word queen or the word quiet, quite, quaint, it's Q-U, qu. In Spanish, you don't pronounce the U, it's just a K sound. For example, quiero. The word quiero means I want. You would say quiero, and it's Q-U-I-E-R-O. Quiero. Or for example, the word que. Q-U-E, which means what? Que. So if you ever see a Q followed by a U, you don't pronounce it. It's just a K sound. Now we will move on to the letter R. Now the letter R is probably one of the biggest challenges for non-Spanish speakers, especially English people and also French people. French people struggle with it as well, purely because we have very soft R pronunciation in our language, whereas in Spanish it's very strong. And there are two sounds made by the letter R. The first sound is the roll, this very typical Spanish roll that they have. And this comes into play when a word starts with the letter R or has two R's in the middle of the word. For example, the word rojo. Rojo begins with an R, it means red, rojo. It also has that J sound, the sound of the J, rojo, R-O-J-O. We also have the word perro, which means dog, P-E-R-R-O, perro. Now, perro sounds very similar to the word but in Spanish, which brings me on to the second sound of the R, which is when there is just a singular R in the middle of a word. For example, the word pero, which means but, pero. Unlike perro, which means dog, pero means but. Or for example, the word creo, which means I believe, creo. So there's two different sounds that the R makes, and I might make another podcast to try and sort of give tips on how to make the R sound easier. It's one of those things, unfortunately, that just takes practice. 50% of people can and 50% of people can't do it when they first start learning Spanish. I personally was one of those who couldn't, so I had to practice it, and I've finally managed to do it. It's one of those things, practice makes perfect. If you just keep at it, something will click and you'll be able to do it. Moving on to the letter S, which is exactly the same in English as it is in Spanish, so we'll move on to the letter T. Now the letter T is pronounced in a similar way to the English alphabet, however sometimes it can sound a little bit like the D sound. It's a very soft sound. For example, if I were to say the word elefante, which means elephant. Elefante, if I were to really pronounce it, elefante, it does sound like a T. But it can also, if I were to say elefante with a D, it sounds very similar. They're very similar letters, so you've just got to sort of keep watch of that. The letter V, we'll move on from the letter U because we did that in the first podcast. The letter V we also looked at in the first podcast, as it is exactly the same as the letter B. The word vino or the word vaca. The letter W is exactly the same in English as it is in Spanish. Once again, we won't go through that. Now, the letter X. The letter X doesn't really form part of the Spanish language. It obviously does come up every now and again, as it does in English. But in Spanish, it tends to either be associated with names rather than words. And there are two sounds in particular that come from the letter X, and that's an S and a sound once again. The S is more Peninsular Spanish, it's more current Spanish. The sound is usually for names that derive from Old Spanish that you tend to hear in Latin America. For example, we have xilófono, xilófono, which is the same as xylophone with an X in English. It's got an X in Spanish, but it's xilófono rather than a Z sound. When it comes to the sound, like I said, it's more for names. So we have the name Javier, which can be spelt with an X. Can also be spelt with a J, but it can be spelt with an X. We also have the word or the name Jimena, which is also with an X. Once again, it's not very typically seen in the Spanish language, so if you do see it, just keep note of it. Now we move on to the letter Y. The letter Y has a very similar pronunciation to the double L, the ella. However, it is a lot stronger. In certain regions of Spain, they're actually identical. The J sound from the Y and the J sound from the double L are exactly the same. Some people can tell the difference, some people can't. For example, we'll use the word yo, which means I. Yo. Yo me llamo Jody. Lots of J's. Yo, Y-O, me llamo, double L-A-M-O. They're very, very similar. It's very difficult to distinguish the difference. So that's the Y. It's just a J sound. Now we move on to the final letter, which is the Z. Now the Z is always pronounced as a th sound, similar to the C when it's followed by an E or an I. For example, in the word cerveza. Cerveza. The cerveza has the th sound for the C-E at the beginning, and it has the th sound at the end for the Z. Cerveza. We also have the word zorro, which means fox. Zorro. Z-O, zorro. It also has the double R in there as well, so it's a zorro rather than zorro. And that's the Z, which is everything. Everything that you need to know about the alphabet we've covered. Like I said, I will be making help sheets for it, so you can take a little bit of a deeper look into certain letters and you can see some tips on how to look for them and pronounce them. If your preferred way of learning is to read, then it will be quite helpful for you. So, like I said, the alphabet, although very simple, although very basic, it is the foundation of the Spanish language. So it is worth spending time on, it's worth learning. And remember, learn at your own pace. Practice makes perfect, and you will get there. It took me a while, so it might take you a while. Equally, you might get it straight away, and if so, I'm jealous. So that's everything, and I will see you in the next podcast.